Okay, if you guys could also grab your seats, we're gonna get started in about a minute. If everyone could grab a seat, that includes everyone standing to the right of the room. You can't really see the screens very well, but we don't. We did the best we could. Okay, I'm going to do just a quick couple minute sort of orientation that I want everyone to take a look at up on these screens. And for those remotely, should be able to see this as well. We have we're utilizing a different event management system this year that you probably have noticed, and it's a little bit buggy, but we're going to get through it and fix it and work with it, hopefully. As a result, we are trying to get away from those hard copy agendas that we typically print every year. And that's where this device comes into it. Almost everyone in this room probably has this in their pocket. So I'm going to show you how to quickly access most of the information that we typically provide in that printed agenda. So if you go to wasmallfruit.com, okay, and I'll go there. I'm going to try to do this in real time if it allows me. Yep. Thanks. On the back of the seats in this room is a guide on how to access this as well. But I'm just being overly cautious this first session so that people get a sense of how to access this, okay? It's going to take you to basically a mobile-friendly website, okay? We're going to go there, and then I'm going to go to Program, okay? And it's going to kick me over to, or it should. It's not doing it right now. That's kind of embarrassing. It should for you, though. It didn't work last night. Yeah, we've run into some issues with this system. I'm not going to lie. Here it is right here. Okay, so this is what it looks like. And on the bottom left-hand corner is a menu. You click on and it opens up. And I'm just going to show you a portion of it today. And this is how to access the agenda for the next couple days. So you click on agenda on the left, and it's going to bring up the same thing you can see on the website. This is just a mobile-friendly website. You can select days by going between days, Thursday, Friday. You can pick tracks. So if you're only interested in blueberries, let's say, you can go to just blueberries, and it's going to filter it out, as it did there. By clicking on a specific topic, let's take a look at Bev's, because we all are excited for Bev's talk that's coming up here in a minute. We go ahead in there, and it gives us some information, and it has the amount of pesticide credits. I know everyone is interested in that, okay? And keep in mind that you have to be present for the entire session to get credit for to get those credits. Now, what I really want to show you is how to leave a review. We live and die by feedback from attendees at the university level, but it also gives us guidance to speakers to improve their presentations and content. So to access that, you simply click on leave a review, and it's going to take you to a very short but quick survey that's not totally showing up. I'll leave. You just leave stars based on this, okay? Now, if you want to enter yourself into a drawing for a $5 Woods coffee card, or whatever you want to buy with $5 at Woods, every session has one of these. So you could really rack these up to the next couple days. Just think about that. You have to leave your email address. It's the only way we can keep track of who is going to want to do that. You do not have to leave your email address, okay? But please provide this feedback. Any quick questions? Okay. Again, there's a guide on the back of your seat, and everyone wearing one of these vests knows how to use this, so feel free to ask them. Onwards we go. Okay. Just give me a sec, Bev. Okay, George. George, go ahead and where is he? Oh, there.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Dr. Beverly Gerdeman, PhD from WSU. She is from the the Mount Vernon Experiment Station, and she'll be presenting first.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning and welcome to Moth Mania. So we've had some unusual activity with lepidopterans in the last couple of years, and so I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about them. I chose these to talk about, and I chose these to talk about for a couple of reasons. One, because they have been a problem, and secondly, because many of them are an export issue. For example, China and Korea are two export markets that require verification. That means a grower is going to have to monitor for these in his field, and this would be for fresh blueberry only. And for example, growers are required to monitor for both of the fruit worms. That means the cherry and the cranberry fruit worm. And they're also required to monitor for the leaf rollers if you are exporting to Korea. So these have export implications. So this morning I'm going to be talking about orange tortrix, the oblique banded leaf roller, cherry fruit worm, and those are the tortricids. So the family Tortricidae is a family of moths. They're rather small moths. They hold their wings like little tents over their body. And surprisingly, some of them are fairly strong flyers. The cherry fruit worm is one that, unlike the other two that I'll be talking about this morning, only attacks blueberry. I'll also be talking briefly about noctuids. Noctuidae is a family of moths that you find them coming to your porch light at night. They're gray, they're kind of nondescript, gray or brown. And I'll be talking about the spotted cutworm, the winter cutworm, and also the true armyworm, which is really not a pest of either of the berry crops, but this is one that has been a problem in Whatcom County, and many of you are growing some of your forage crops and some of your grasses as rotational crops. So I want to briefly mention those. I will talk a little bit about winter cutworm. It doesn't have the berry crops mentioned in its host list, but I think you'll be surprised to see what's flying through your fields. We'll talk about that later on. So these are the primary leaf rollers in Whatcom and Skagit County. So in Whatcom County, you primarily have the oblique banded leaf roller, and in Skagit County, you primarily have the orange tortrix. And these are both members of Tortricidae. And this is what they can do if you leave them for the summer generation. So key is here, we're going to be looking at ideas on how to control that overwintering larval generation. So they can be direct pests of your berries, as well as feeding on buds and some other damaging things. So here's a sort of a picture, a snapshot of what they can do. So these overwintering larvae, they're going to emerge fairly early, and they can damage buds. They can web blueberries and raspberries together. We normally see this more in blueberry than we do in red raspberry, but it certainly has been reported before. They can even crawl inside that little core of the red raspberry and web inside there too. They can cause direct berry damage to both berries. One of the main problems is they are also machine harvest contaminants. We're not talking about the moths being machine harvest contaminants. We're talking about the larval stage. So these little larvae are really aggravated. They're aggravated by any sort of activity, movement around them, movement of a machine harvester moving through the fields, and it's going to cause them to be irritated, and they're going to spin down on a little web, and they end up in the berries. And that's what we don't want. The OBLR is particularly one of the stronger flyers of your tortricids. Bruner and Chambers did some, and Jones did some work on OBLR as far as the effects of flight on these tortricids. And it turns out that when they fly from your neighbor's field into your field, then they can lay even more eggs. Here's the generalized life cycle of a leaf roller. And for whatever reason, we're missing one image. It's an overwintering image of where the canes are tied up on the trellis, and that's where they can overwinter. Let's start with that overwintering stage. So we're talking about small larvae, tiny larvae, and they're going to be overwintering in things like dead leaves. So if you tie up your caneberries too early, then you're going to have those dead leaves compressed against the trellis. It's a great habitat for those overwintering larvae. They can also survive in mummified fruits, under buds, and weeds near the host. And you're going to be hearing about weeds more and more because weeds are an alternative host for many of these leaf rollers. And so if you have a weedy, unkept field, then this could promote higher populations and migration into neighboring fields. So that's where they are in the winter. So when spring comes, we're going to be seeing these tiny larvae begin to be active, and they can feed on the buds and damage the buds. So you'll notice on this life cycle that I have approximate times. That's because we really haven't determined the phenology very good on this side of the mountain. So that's something that I think we need to do. So in the case of the leaf rollers, they move from those buds. When the leaves start coming out, they're going to move to those leaves because that's what they're going to feed on primarily. And the leaves are they're young and they're tender and they can roll very easily. So oftentimes a way to look in your fields is to look at those new shoot growth. Look at those tender leaves, and you can find these characteristic web nests. Look at this. I know you've all seen that before. So they're webbing those leaves together. And this goes for blueberry and for raspberry. So inside those leaves, they're feeding, but they also pupate inside those leaves. So around May, they might be going through pupation to emerge as adults in approximately late May. So anytime you have adults flying, you have the possibility that eggs are going to be laid. And the eggs are laid in masses, and they're laid on the smooth area of the leaf. So that means, you know, usually the upper surface of the leaf. So they're all together. And then in the summer, the adults are going to lay their eggs here, and then you go into the summer generation, and this is the damaging generation. So the key in controlling and preventing damage to your berries is to control them in the springtime. You're going to be wanting to control these overwintering larvae right here when they come out and start feeding on these leaves. So we've got some opportunities to look for timing for applications. So the second generation adults will be present, August through September. And during that time, they'll be laying eggs and then rolling leaves again. And it's, of course, that time that they can be damaging those berries and also becoming potential harvest contaminants. Oh, there's the pictures. So anyway, that's a picture of how they overwinter in the cane berries if you tie your canes up a little too early. So there may be some surprises like that, sorry. You know, the tree fruit group have really done a lot of studies and research on the leaf rollers, and OBLR is one of them. So we can look to them for some ideas and information, and they really have given us a good base on what we can do here on the west side. So what they've done is they've looked at degree day models for OBLR and created their degree day models for apples and tree fruits. Now, for us, the problem is we really haven't developed that phenology here in Western Washington for red raspberry and blueberry for the OBLR. And OBLR seems to be a real problem up here in Whatcom County. So this is something we need to look at in the future. So let's look at these two different graphs. On the left side, we see Whatcom County, and on the right side, we'd see Skagit. And these are degree day graphs. And for the eastern side in the tree fruits, the 200 degree day mark is something that they look for, because that at that time over in the tree fruit area, that means the fourth instar is present. When you have the fourth instar present, that is actually the optimum instar to be treating with your sprays. So what we need to do is determine whether that would be valid for the west side or not. So let's just look at a hypothetical thing. Let's see. At 200-degree days in Whatcom County, we're looking about mid-April to late April. Skagit is the same way. You'll see 3 different lines on these graphs. The light-colored line was 2016. That was our real hot year. And then the blue line is 2018, and the black line is an average for quite a few years, about 10 years. So you can see that primarily Whatcom and Skagit County on average are pretty similar. And if we look at the degree day models on the east side, we could guesstimate that around 90% of the overwintering emergence would be around April 1. And so there really are 2 key things we want to determine here on the west side. We want to determine when that overwintering emergence has occurred, the peak timing for that. And we also want to determine when that 4th instar is present so we can target our sprays to that. Of course, there may be limitations with our crops because of pollinators, but it's something that we'll have to see. So let's look at what's going on around that time in the 2 crops. So for leaf rollers and red raspberry, if you look at the spray guides, they're going to tell you that in April, start to scout for your overwintering generation of leaf rollers, and you can find them a lot easier in leaves than you can find them, webbing little buds. So this is when the time you'll be looking for those newly rolled leaves. So one thing that Sheila Fitzpatrick in BC has determined is that most of the larvae, at least in BC, have emerged by 2 to 3 weeks following that first bud swell, and that is in red raspberry. So that's something that we can go on. What about OBLR and blueberry? So about that time, you might want to be scouting for worms at bud break. And bud break can vary a lot, but we're going to estimate maybe mid-March for Duke. It could be as much as 2 weeks later, but that's something, at least it's an idea of when to be scouting for these larvae in your blueberry. This is some of the leaf rolling that they can do in red raspberry. On the left, you can even see the little oblique banded leaf roller larvae right there. And over here, you can see the OT. You can also see how different those larvae are. The oblique banded has black head capsule and is fairly dark green, whereas the OT has more of a brownish head capsule, and it can vary from green to actually a pink color. So as far as leaf roller management, again, we can get some ideas from what's going on the east side in the tree fruit industry. So remember, eggs and larvae are not present all year round. We will find the eggs only a couple of times of the year. So targeting those might be just another alternative. But eggs that have been treated with an IGR will affect those newly hatched little larvae who tend to feed on the eggshells. And typically, any IGR is pretty slow acting, but it's pretty effective. And besides that, it's fairly long lasting. Of course, one thing you need to check is if these are compatible with the export countries that you will be sending or shipping fruit to. As far as the larvae are concerned, not only your IGRs like Confirm, Esteem, Intrepid, those types of IGRs, but also spinosad has shown to have similar results in pre-bloom treatments over on the east side. So it might be something that we could look at depending on pollinator schedules. BT could be a little bit of a problem. BT, it requires about 3 applications actually to make it fairly effective. One of the problems here is you have to get that daily maximum temperature, around between 60, 65, maybe even 70. So you need a maximum temperature of that much. So, you know, early treatment with BT certainly could be a little bit of a problem here. We may not see the efficacy that we want to, but again, it may take 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 applications before we'll see an effect from BT. We also have some newer reduced risk insecticides, and this is what Bruner and his group looked at for years, and they determined that things like Delegate and Altacor are highly effective against these types of moths. So it might be something that we would look at over here for control of these as an alternative to some of your OPs and pyrethroids. As far as controlling the adults, I think if you control that spring population, then the adults won't be so much of a problem in the summer generation. So it's something that we'll have to see. So the adults normally are going to be controlled by your spotted wing Drosophila sprays. Most of you are spraying on a weekly schedule. Some of you may be backing off a little bit. We had a little bit lighter season last year. And if that occurs, then we may have some moths move in. Remember that these things are quite migratory, so they're going to move from farm to farm. So you could have reservoirs in weedy areas where they could move in from. All right, one of the fruit worms that we're concerned about here is the cherry fruit worm. Again, it's an export problem. And this one only attacks blueberry. It has a single generation per year. It is a tortricid, and you can see that this adult holds its wings like most tortricids in that little tent-like manner. It is a grayish moth, unlike some of your other moths. This one is going to lay, instead of a mass of flat eggs on top of the leaf surface, it's going to lay singly placed eggs around that calyx area. So that's where you're going to be looking for these tiny little eggs. So in BC, we can look at timing there, anywhere from mid-May to early June, and that would be the time that you might want to start looking for these. These are going to hatch, and they're going to bore into either that calyx area, or they can crawl on the outside of the berry and make a hole in the cheek area. So not necessarily just in the calyx, but that might be one thing you would look for to try to identify the fact that it is a cherry fruit worm. So if you look at the damage that they do, they primarily stay inside that berry. So you're going to find frass inside the berry. You're not really going to see webbing of the berries like we do in oblique banded and like we do in the cranberry fruit worm. And speaking of the cranberry fruit worm, BC has been monitoring for cranberry fruit worm. I did some sort of casual monitoring for it a couple of years ago and didn't find anything. They've been monitoring this since around 2011. Partly it was because of an export issue, but certainly they have been seeing an increase in the number of cranberry fruit worm, but it has not been damaging any blueberries so far. So far so good. But it will attack, it has been known to attack vaccinium over on the eastern coast primarily. So in 2018, we had some harvest outbreaks. And so what caused those? Again, look down here. You can see the little oblique banded right here. You can see what it does to a cluster of berries. It webs those berries together. It feeds on not only on the skin of that fruit, but it also bores into the fruit, and not necessarily just through the calyx. It'll go through the side of the fruit. So one of the ideas is we had failure to control that overwintering generation, and I think that's something that all growers need to look at a little more carefully this year, particularly if you're exporting. I think it's something you need to follow a lot closer. It could be also that resistance is developing. One of the problems with OBLR is that it is just notorious for developing resistance. And unfortunately, we've been fighting spotted wing Drosophila for what, 9-10 years now? So it is certainly the possibility. So when it comes to resistance, there has been some work done over on the east side. Again, Bruner is a big researcher on this. So in the first case, he looked at susceptibility of OBLR to the new reduced risk insecticides. We're talking spinedoram, and we're talking chlorantraniliprole, which is Altacor. So what he found was there was occurrence of significant levels of resistance against chlorantraniliprole, that's Altacor, and Delegate, which is spinedoram, in field collected OBLR before they even applied the treatment. So these are already pre-primed to be resistant against that. So it's not total resistance, but certainly he's been looking at resistance. And that one, I can't see the date on that one. So the next one, he looked at resistance and cross resistance in populations of leaf rollers like your OBLR and Pandemus in Washington apples. And what he found was that there was a cross resistance between glutathione, which is azinphosmethyl, which is, we don't use that, and the IGRs, tebuphenoxide and methoxyphenoxide. So we had that cross resistance appear in the population. So it could be that an OP, if it becomes resistant to an OP, it could also become resistant to cross-resistant to your IGRs, which sounds unusual, but that is the case. The third study it did looked at selection for resistance and reversion of that resistance. So what happened in this case was they found significant levels of resistance developed about after 12 generations. But then after 6 generations, when there was no longer any selective pressure with that material, they reverted back to pre-application levels and of effect or efficacy. So that's the good thing. So that means that it looks like resistance could be unstable. So that means it could come and go. It could come as soon as 12 generations, but leave as quickly as 6 generations if you stay off that chemical. So in response to the outbreaks we had in 2018, we decided to see just what was flying in a raspberry field. So we put a black light up in Whatcom County, and we ran it through August and September. We first had a battery-operated one, ran into a few little technical difficulties, and then we turned to a solar-powered one. This is what we'll be looking at again using next year, but it conked out in September, unfortunately, but we did get some results. So when we monitored the trap, we found high levels of a couple of different cutworms. And this was, again, late season, and oftentimes you'll find high level of noctuids flying around at that time. So this is an image of what our traps look like, and this is an image of 1 week catch. And you can see that particularly, look at this one right here. When you see those yellow-orange underwings, you're looking at the Noctua pronuba, the winter cutworm. So the results of the 2018 trapping were we found primarily 2 species of noctuid, and they were captured in large numbers. So in one case, we had like 100 moths in the trap, and they were these 2 species right here. So the little sort of nondescript cutworm that you'll see, and you'll see this pattern on the back. This is what you're going to be looking for. It's kind of like a blocky letter C. And so this is known as Zestia C. nigrum, and this is your spotted cutworm. And so these we found in high numbers. And also, if you look at the right, you'll see this is your winter cutworm. They have those beautiful underwings. I've been seeing lots more of these really in the past 2 years in my own yard. So I know that they're increasing in numbers. Last February, March, I had a grower. It was a grape grower. He had a small vineyard over in Stanwood area, and he found the larvae crawling around his vines at that time. So, so we've been looking at these. The literature does not say that they are pests on the small fruits, but the fact is, finding this many of them around that field, I'd say it's something that you should be on the watch for. They're called the winter cutworm because they have been known to crawl across the snow. So Tracy was telling me just before this presentation that she wasn't able to capture any adult pronuba after around the middle part of October, probably related to temperatures. And so anyway, that gives you an idea. So something to be watching for. These can feed on buds. Anytime you have a caterpillar that overwinters in the caterpillar stage, it's ready to come out as soon as the temperatures warm a little bit and feed directly. So usually it's the caterpillars that are primarily the problem. Your spotted cutworm, it has a typical look to it. If you want to find spotted cutworm, you would go out in the field and dig around the canes at the bottom in the dirt. and they will curl up in a C pattern. You know it because that's very typical of all cutworms. And they have that sort of greasy appearance to them. They do know that cutworms are a greater problem in fields that have sod or mulch than those fields that have clean culture. Now this one can overwinter in all stages: eggs, larvae, pupae, adults. And again, it is a larval stage that's the most destructive because they can feed and damage buds and leaves much earlier than others. This is what you'd look for. If you're looking for cutworm damage, you would want to look at leaves that have been fed on towards the lower part of the canes. And so in this case, you can see they kind of rat up the leaves. They'll feed around. In some cases, when you see a hole in the center of the leaf, you might say, oh, maybe that's a slug damage. But if there's no slug trails, then I would say more likely it is your cutworm damage. So again, this is where you'll be looking for cutworms out in your field. And this was in August, I believe. So another one I want to mention is another noctuid, and this is a true armyworm. And this is a rotational grass pest, and it was a real severe problem up here in Whatcom County and even Skagit County too. So as a result of that outbreak in 2017, we decided to get together with a group of researchers, and Tracy headed this up in BC, and it went through Washington, it went through Oregon, it went down into California. So the idea was to try to determine where those moths were coming from. And so there was a study done, and because of the wings that we sent to this researcher, he was able to determine where these moths came from. So the results were, typically there are 2 flights. You know, there are 2 flights, and the second flight is the most devastating to the forage fields. In 2017, however, we had a lot of rain early in the year, and it resulted in a lot of lush grass. So it could have been that we just did not detect that first flight. But the second flight was really powerful, and we certainly had high numbers that year. So for us, they migrate in from California, from particularly rice fields down in that area. And the good thing is, so far, there's been no evidence that they overwinter in the Pacific Northwest. So here's a couple of strategies you might look at. One of the things I'm interested in is the potential for mating disruption for something like your oblique banded. So mating disruption uses a pheromone. It saturates a field with a pheromone, and the males just can't figure out where the females are, and so it reduces the population in that manner. There is one that's already registered for blueberries. This is isomate OBLR PLR plus, and it's produced by Pacific Biocontrol Corporation in Vancouver. And I talked with Don Thomas a few months back about this idea, and he told me that there was an organic grower that had been purchasing these for the past 2 years, and that the results were positive. At least that's what that grower said. I tried to reach out to the grower but did not hear back from him, so I don't have any further evidence than that. So it might be an idea to help us reduce the populations, but there are pros and cons when it comes to this type of an approach. Well, the good things are it's compatible with all your beneficials. It doesn't cause any problems with your predatory mites. It's a one-time application. You know, it's a season-long application. The rate is around 200 per acre. It could add an additional IPM tactic for managing OBLR. There's no resistance known. There might be sort of a just, you know, getting saturated with that odor possibility, but so far it's not been determined. It's also an acceptable management tool for leaf rollers and other crops. They're looking at the potential for this in light brown apple moth down in red raspberry in California. And of course, it's been used in codling moth over on the east side and in apple growing regions across the United States. So it's become an industry standard in that way. But not all leaf rollers are the same. Some have different rates of reproduction, and some just behave a little differently. So there may be differences that we have to look at. The cons are that in this case, they have to be hand applied. We don't have any of the puffers or any of the other technology that they have in tree fruit, but those aren't perfect either. So hand applied is good, but of course, that's a labor issue. costly. It's around $60 per acre is an estimate that I heard. That may or may not be the case. And primarily it's a supplemental. It's not a standalone management tool. And some of the reasons are that OBLR is a strong flyer and it has high fecundity. I emailed Vince Jones about this because they've been using this over in the tree fruit industry for the codling moth. And I said, what about OBLR? He said, well, it reduces it from oh my God levels down to just lots of moths. So it may need some work. But of course, that's a different host. We're small fruit, and we have really flat land over here. So it could be that it might be an opportunity to try it over here. Another thing that they looked at that no one has looked at lately, and that is attract and kill strategy. What they found out with this, and this was, they use an attracticide for codling moth, but they were using it against these 3 different larvae. You can see that this is your OBLR right here. And so what they found out was, and this is with a 6% permethrin in it, after 24 hours, they killed 94% of the moths that came in contact with that fresh attracticide of all 3 species. And then after 30 days of a field-aged attracticide, they still could knock down greater than 50% of the moths out there. So that was based on 2005. And I recently sent another email to find out why didn't they follow up on this any further. So there may be some more details that I'm missing, but it sort of looks interesting, doesn't it? So with that, I think I'll end my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gerdeman. If you have questions, you can probably talk to her afterwards. Go ahead and catch her in the back. We'd like to try to keep on schedule. Our next presenter this morning is Alan Schreiber of the Ag Development Group, Incorporated.
I've been funded by both the Washington Blueberry Commission and the Washington Raspberry Commission to do some work on some insects in